Let's go get going.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For me? And you're the only one who can handle it?
Yeah.
I get it. Very good. All right. Then I gotta make a change on that one. What's this? Okay, so we got to this, didn't we? We got South Vietnam collapsing, Cambodia, Laos, the Paris Peace Accords, we got Watergate. Wow, lots of stuff. Let me talk about Miles City during this time, but moving on. So this is the U.S. Embassy, and these are U.S. soldiers here trying to keep all these South Vietnamese civilians who had helped the U.S. government or the South Vietnamese government were terrified that North Vietnam would, well, kill them or imprison them. They would actually put many of them in re-education camps. But they tried to get over the fence. Some would come out with American forces, but most did not. Here's North Vietnamese tanks entering. In fact, literally, as North Vietnamese tanks were entering the streets of Saigon, the last American Marines were being taken out of the embassy. They forgot about them. And there were 8 Marines on the roof of the U.S. Embassy, frantically radioing for somebody get us out. And the helicopter came in and picked them up. And the North Vietnamese just let them go. And it was a humiliating defeat. Humiliating. The United States wasted so much of its prestige in this battle, so much wealth. Let's be clear, 59,000 dead, 2.5 million Vietnamese for a war that would have been over in 65 if the U.S. would intervene, and they could have ended in 68, at the end of 68. So an absolute disaster. Here is people trying to rush on board with the helicopters in the parking lot of the embassy. Here is a safe house for the CIA, pulling out a few of their people, because if anybody who's helping the CIA, when the Southern government ended, if they were helping them, they were dead. And all these South Vietnamese military helicopters flew out. Their pilots put in, like their family sailed out. That's the Mount Whitney, a U.S. Navy command ship. They didn't have room for the helicopters. So these $2 million helicopters landed, they just pushed them over. Pushed them on the ocean to bring them, make more room. And that happened over 80 times out from Saigon. Like the personification of the West that happened in this horrible war. And the worst thing that happened after this war was the treatment of the veterans. It was not what the myth is, that they were attacked or spit upon or things like that. That didn't really happen at all. There's no photographic evidence of that happening at all. Even though people say it to this day, that didn't happen. Huh? Yeah, urinating on bridge phones did not happen. They were involved. That was the problem. Everybody ignored the veterans because they didn't want to acknowledge what the disaster was. That is a crime. And unfortunately, people make a bigger show of it today, but that's still going on. Still going on. Much to my anger, and I probably get you yours, but the 70s would continue to go on. As you can tell from these beautiful clothes for the JCPenney catalog. Or look at the Montgomery Wars, which is gone. And I should add, I had something like this. Yeah. And I know what you're thinking. I made it work. Still fits. No. I love the outfits of that. I like the belt. Okay. Well, I already mentioned a little bit about the women's rights movement. Well, one of the culmination of the women's rights movement is going to be the Equal Rights Amendment. And the Equal Rights Amendment, the main element was no discrimination based upon sex. So remember, the 14th Amendment had nothing about nothing about, or wasn't clear about men and women. Even though the Civil Rights Act said no discrimination based upon sex, that's still a law, and laws can be repealed or just ignored by the government. Here is a constitutional right. And it passed, it needed 2/3 of the House and the Senate. Well, there's still a Democratic majority, but the majority of both Republicans and Democrats at that time were for the ERA. And it was actually signed by Republican President Nixon, who was for it, and so was Gerald Ford. So they were for the Equal Rights Amendment. They quickly got 33 states, needed 38, need 3/4 of the states. Looked like it was there. It's almost going to pass. Montana didn't ratify it right away. Montana ratified it almost immediately. In Montana's state constitution, which had literally just been ratified, the new constitution, just before this amendment came out, in the constitution that is Montana state law today, it says no discrimination based upon sex. That it's in Montana's constitution. So Montana ratified it right away. And would it ratify it today? No, not a chance. But it ratified it then. And so we're a lot different state today. And then it stopped. All the states ratified it right. The states that ratified it right away, and then no more states. It got an extension, but it got an extension until 1981. And then it became a big polarizing issue as Republicans turned against it. And Republicans, so President Ford, Republican, was for it, but then the next Republican president would be opposed to it. The Republican Party came out against the Equal Rights Amendment. And then a serious backlash against it. And that backlash would be very successful. One of the leaders of it was Phyllis Schlafly, who would fight right here against ERA. And she got to start co-writing a book for Barry Goldwater back in 1962. But she was this dynamic, incredibly intelligent leader, brought people together. She proved that women could lead and take positions, and she did it in such a way to make sure that women could not do these things, which I always found fascinating. But what people started to say, a lot of men said, that women are even divided over, and they used the horrible term, it is nothing but a catfight. And women are fighting over it. Why should men care if women can't decide they want equal rights? And it was divisive. We can't go into all the reasons for it, but it really did, to a lot of women, it felt like they were mocking the decision they made to become housewives, which it wasn't, but that was a real issue. But this would help fuel a conservative revival, to go back to the old hierarchies. And the main arguments against it were, as you could probably imagine, one of the big arguments were that women would take men's jobs. And if women take men's jobs, that would cut wages for all. Another big argument was that it would destroy marriages. Once women had equal rights, they would just be a very flighty, this was very sexist argument, and they would no longer be married and go off. And then another argument that was used over and over again, as you can see from this very crude sign, was they would practice witchcraft. No, obviously that's not it. It's that women would all become lesbians if they had equal rights and didn't know their place. But the argument that actually had the most salience was bathrooms. That if women and men were equal, public restrooms would only be unisex, and there would not be separate male and female bathrooms. And this picture shows it pretty well from 74. Or this is 76, I'm sorry. Here's a restroom, woman going in, and they're pretty crude, rapist on it. And there are a lot of pictures and drawings of like little girls going to a restroom and it's like a biker gang going behind them. This restroom issue. Because we all know, if there's any places with public facilities that are like unisex and not for men and women, anarchy will ensue. We all know that is true, because no one has ever seen anything like that in like today. Am I right? Okay, I'm being slightly facetious, right? It's all over the place. And one more thing. No one would ever use a bathroom issue today on an issue about rights, would they? That would never happen now. Once again, arguments are used over and over again. And it's not even whether you agree or disagree with the arguments today. Same issues about trans rights are used about bathrooms today. It's almost the same argument It's amazing how history just kind of cycles and cycles. Was it successful? Yes. They never got to 38. And the ERA was not ratified. Now, technically, every state that ratified it still ratified it, but it's too late to become a constitutional amendment. Today, there are 38 states, but it's too late. They would have to actually go through Congress again, get 2/3 of the vote of Congress to get it ratified. And not only would it not get 2/3, it would not get a majority in the United States Congress today. 3 votes. And so that means someone at the door. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Good evening.
I don't know, I kept hearing something.
It's a gift. It's starting. Is it something you need right now? Do you know what it is? That's a spoon. It's something.
Then they should get it now, regular class.
They say, stop ERA for Reagan. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah, Montana wouldn't ratify it. So, in 76, there's a presidential election. So, once again, the whole and the equal right, equal rights still exists. And this was a really weird election because it's in the shadow of Watergate and Vietnam. Gerald Ford of Michigan will run again. And this time, remember, he was appointed president, appointed vice president, became president. And even though at first his popularity went up, it was really low. There was a kind of a small recession going on. Jimmy Carter was the governor of Georgia, and he ran against government. So he was a new kind of Democrat. And no one knew who he was. The joke was Jimmy who. But he used that to his advantage as a dark horse. And he had this infectious grin. He seemed different, new. He talked about bringing peace and human rights. Yes, yet he was a Naval Academy graduate. And so he had this kind of interesting background. He was a big fish in a small pond in Georgia, kind of a wealthy family, but not terribly rich. He believed in some civil rights, but wasn't really a civil rights fighter. It's just this interesting group of people or group of ideals. Said he would never lie, which of course he's human, so that's a lie. And this is going to lead to a new kind of Democrats that are going to come out. And this new Democrats, it wasn't the plan, but more and more, it's going to be identity politics. So it's going to be more and more individual little groups, the different groups by color of skin or race or ethnic background or all kinds of different groups. Well, the Republican Party is going to be shifting to become more and more a party of basically just very homogeneous. Very homogeneous. Now, it wasn't like that before. It's changing. Also, they thought they'd go away from the old urban working class, small farmers, and try to get urban professionals and college graduates. The thought was these uneducated hard hats back during the Vietnam War, the silent majority that Nixon appealed to, let's go to somebody else. And I should add, it failed miserably for Democrats. And they still try, they've been trying this ever since, and it's never really worked. Also, a new economic idea called neoliberalism is called. But neoliberalism is the European term of liberalism, meaning more conservative. So abandon Keynesian economics, abandon the New Deal, meaning they abandoned the New Deal. Not completely, but more and more Democrats, they started talking about, oh, we're not going to be the old party of that deal. We're not going to be the party of labor unions. We're not going to be the party of Lyndon Johnson. We'll be the party of urban professionals. And it backfired horribly for Democrats. It would get some very neoliberal conservative economics presidents like Carter, Clinton, Obama. Biden we started to go away with it, but who knows what's what. And so the result, a razor thin victory. You'll notice one thing. This is the last time of the Solid South. The last time Democrats would win the South. Why? Because Carter was from Georgia. The last time. It would never happen again. This is also the last time that evangelical Protestant Christians voted kind of 50-50. After this, evangelical Christians would vote about 90 to 95% of Republicans. Today it's about 97, 98. So the big shift is coming, which is fascinating because Carter was a very vocal evangelical Christian. But then they would say that he abandoned this by going for things like equal rights for women. So after his election, 77, we have Star Wars. So I had to put a picture of Star Wars. The only reason is because I want the German poster. That's really the only reason. And there is somebody in this classroom that had waited in line for 45 minutes for the first Star Wars. Luke? He's not even here.
Oh, I'm good.
He didn't even-
You can throw this one. I don't use this.
Oh, good, but so throw a pencil at him, thank you. Well, since Luke isn't gonna take credit for it, yes, I waited 45 minutes in front of the Montana Theater in Mile City to watch the first Star Wars. It was not Luke.
Looked at it.
Luke decided he liked high school. If you haven't seen the first Star Wars, it is a very good movie. And in many ways, it's kind of a Cold War parallel. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And the second one's really good too. And then they just, but they're even the good ones are coming back. Who's seen this one? You should watch it. Actually, don't mind. So, hey, let's get to fun stuff. I'll get back to a little bit of the economy in just a second. But the Iranian hostage crisis would dominate the end of Carter's administration, also with the Cold War blowing up again. Yay, Cold War. Carter came in as actually talking more peace and arms control and would leave talking World War III. Carter was an interesting president. Let's review. Oh, how do we get out of order here? Let me backtrack. Everyone act busy. Look, I tried to make you famous. You didn't even notice. Thanks a lot. What? I told about you waiting in line to see Star Wars back in 1977. Oh, yeah. Good recovery. Good job. This might hurt your grade.
You walked in. I can't wait. Best person. Honored. Sometimes I look out.
It's Vietnam and the Cold War, yeah. And lots of German World War I references. So back to this. All right. So remember I told you in 1953, the US, the CIA overthrew the democracy for oil. They put in the brutal Shah of Iran. And this is going to lead to a series of events that we're still paying for today. So overthrowing the democracy in Iran. So 78 was the Islamic Revolution. And many in Iran thought it would bring back the democracy. They carried pictures of their old president Mossadegh. No, it led to an Islamic police state, which is still there today. Iran's a very interesting country. It's a place I would really like to visit, but I think it'd be very difficult to visit. But I would really like to go there. But anyways, so the Shah fled, and they blamed the United States for very good reason for everything. And the Shah caught cancer. The Shah had cancer, and the United States let him in, and Iran thought they're going to overthrow the government, just like 53. And Iranian students, with the support of the government, radicalized students, mostly Shia Muslims, stormed the US embassy and ended up holding hostages, 51 hostages for 444 days. And the United States was so humiliated by this. That's them storming over the embassy wall, that's burning an American flag. Day after day, this was on the national news. You can just imagine. And what could we do? If we tried to free the hostages, they'd just kill them. There would be one rescue attempt in 1980, and it turned out to be a disaster south of Tehran. And so it made Carter look inept, even though no one had a solution. And this went on day after day. And this would help fuel the conservative revival. The idea is after Vietnam, we've lost our way. Our enemies are winning. We got to be tough again. How do we be tough? Weapons, military, war. Win a war. That might be nice. That's what people thought. So here's a couple of things, the test. That's the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the religious leader of Iran. These are some of the hostages. There was backlash against Iranians. And while this is going on, there's a real fear that this Islamic revolution that started in Iran might spread up into the Soviet Union, to its neighbor Iraq, this place called Afghanistan. In fact, Iraq would invade Iran with US support under Iraq's new dictator named Saddam Hussein and start a horrible, bloody war. Everything's related. Well, in Afghanistan, the pro-Soviet government there collapsed, and the Soviets freaked out, thinking what happened in Iran might go into the Soviet Union. All the stands, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, those Islamic majority places. And that would lead to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The thought was they go in, put in a pro-Soviet government, keep their buffer zone. Here are Soviet armored personnel carriers. These are Soviet troops in Kabul. And they quickly took the major cities, but it evolved into a horrible civil war. And once again, I don't know how I got this all out of order. It ended Dayton immediately. All the peaceful elements of Dayton ended. Give me a sec. How did I do this? Here we go. Ended Dayton. It was over. In fact, the Olympics were going to be in Moscow, and the U.S. boycotted the Olympics. And I left that on purpose. Civil war began in Afghanistan. There was a lot to say Civil War began there. The Soviets would boycott the Los Angeles Olympics 4 years later. Civil War began in 1979, or let's say War. I missed the R. And would go on till for Afghanistan. Afghanistan is going to be in constant civil war. And most people in Afghanistan have no idea why. No idea why. Just constant war. But Afghanistan was known as, before this, as the graveyard of empires. Russia tried to attack it. The Mughal India tried to attack it back in the 17th century. Britain tried to take it twice. In fact, a British invasion in the 1840s went with 20,000 men, 2 men came out. And they let them live. It's basically say, don't come back. With the mountains, the tribal allegiances, it's a very difficult place to take. And Afghanistan is huge. I know we look at a map of the world and see Afghanistan as being relatively small. It's huge. Well, a group of fighters there, called the Mujahideen, would fight against the Soviet Union. These were various tribal, kind of a hodgepodge of very tribal groups fighting the Soviets. And the US supported them through the CIA. They started in 1980, but especially in 81, 82, 83, sent weapons and supplies. Well, they also recruited very fundamentalist, radicalized Sunni Muslims from all over the world, everywhere from the Middle East all the way to Indonesia, the largest Muslim country. And they had a base set up. The term for the base is called Al-Qaeda. And that would be partially funded by the CIA to bring these foreign fighters. One of those foreign fighters would be Osama bin Laden. And thus beginning the steps towards September 11th. Well, the war would turn into a bloody stalemate. And the Soviets would eventually leave in 1986, but the Civil War has not ended. But this would help fuel the conservative revival. They said, look at what the Soviets did. Because we lost in Vietnam, because Jimmy Carter talked peace, because we cut back on defense, even though we didn't really. The Soviets are winning. The next thing you know, they're going to take the Middle East. 86. So, while this is going on, part of the thing that was going on was an economic phenomenon that should not have happened, called stagflation. if there's inflation, that means people want to buy stuff because they have jobs. And they're pushing prices up. But this is radically different. Inflation and unemployment were both high. The big times where you see 74 and then 79, 80. It should not happen that way. And this opened the door for this conservative revival for trickle down or supply side economics, saying that Keynesian economics was not working. By the way, this is whip inflation now. Gerald Ford's way to get to do something about inflation. And the inflation rate went really high. Now, I can still remember near 20% in 1980. People went nuts during COVID when it went up to about 10%. I can remember double that. But this is probably the key reason for the conservative revival and takeover of American politics was this stagflation. Just prices were going up. And this was at a time where most families in the early 1970s could easily afford meat for every meal. All of a sudden it became very expensive. That was kind of a symbol of middle class life. You could have beef for every meal. So the reason why were oil shocks. Two massive oil shocks that led to a 400% increase in oil prices. Relatively temporary, but will go on for a very long time. In the Middle East, the biggest oil producers there did two embargoes. One in 73, 74, and one in 79 after the Iranian hostage crisis. It's called the Yom Kippur or the October War in 73. It was a counterattack against Israel, and the U.S. supported Israel, and that's why an embargo. Now, the U.S. didn't get a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia, let's say. Don't get hardly any today. But it's a worldwide oil market. And if supply goes down worldwide, that means prices go up everywhere. Everywhere. And the economy was different then than today. It was much more fossil fuel based then than now, much more industrialized. So a 400% increase raised prices on everything. That is why there was stagflation. That is why, for example, agricultural prices went up because it took more money to. It took more money to plant your crop and cultivate it. Here's a gas line in 74. Here's one in 79. Here shows you some of the price increases. Okay. It went up to, I can still vividly remember going to school and prices were about 45 cents a gallon. That's about $3 today. 45 cents a gallon. And 2 days later, they only had enough room. They had to do it by hand for the oil prices. Because they never thought oil would go over $1. They had to put up a piece of cardboard and in the market they put one. And in 2 days it went from 45 cents to 1.30. I'll never forget that. You put this piece of cardboard, they didn't have room for the dollar. That's what, $6 today? Now, that would be quite a shock today. It was even a bigger shock then. And prices went up for everything. And this, in fact, I would be very clear about it. Jimmy Carter would have been reelected, if not, within a second. I don't have any doubt. Good or bad, Carter, I think a very, you had some problematic issues with him as president, but, one more thing I almost forgot. That's when they tried for a decade. They dropped nationwide speed limits down to 55. Nationwide. And so nationwide everywhere. And okay, if you're going like the East Coast, we're counting pretty close, not that big of a deal. If you're driving across Montana, 55 really adds a lot of time to a trip. And that ended in 86, 87, they started going up again. And they also tried daylight savings time to save it. No standard time, daylight savings time year round. The thought was longer, more light in the evening, self-storage, save electricity. Anybody want to guess what happened? First winter it happened, the sun didn't go up in northern latitudes like, let's say, Montana, so 9 or 9:30. So you went to school, the kids were going to elementary school in pitch blankness. And they ended it after 6 months. I can vividly remember being in a playground, and it was pitch black. Plane killed a carrier. Okay, so One person has the football and everybody tries to tackle him. Blood on the playground. So moving on. I just thought his picture was funny, but that's 79. Waiting in the oil line with this mower. Okay, so here's a few more. This was a shock. I should add, these price shocks are big. There's a sudden supply shock. When it happened, it's going to take about 2 months. Sorry, get a drink. 2 months it happened. And we are seeing that right now. Just wait. In April, when President Trump announced 145% tariffs, they cut off all orders from China. All orders from China were cut off. Nothing's coming into Long Beach, Los Angeles, or Seattle. So we're going to get that shock in about 3 weeks. It's going to be a shock. Now, tariffs are still incredibly high. The highest they've been since 1934, but a little bit lower. So some of the orders are going to come back, but it won't be till the end of August. So everything that come from China, it's just going to be, prices are just going to go up. And then companies will use that as a way to kind of gouge. We will see it. Walmart, Target, all these big box stores are already saying, get ready for empty shelves and a lot higher prices. It's coming. So let's get to the 80s. It is kind of amazing to me that we keep seeing the same stuff over and over. Same kind of things. Speaking of that, let's get to the 80s. This, I still can't get over the end of the 80s and the takedown of the Berlin Wall. It's still just so overwhelming to me because the memory was so clear. And you know, being a little bit younger, when the first things you learn, you just remember more. As you get older, it's happened, you know, just the way it is. So let's watch a little bit of the way life was in this era. I know you want to see this. So, okay, I'll lie through my teeth. By the way, I heard a rumor. I did? Between periods? I just heard leaves.
You're playing this between periods already?
I'm not doing anything. I work. All right. So this conservative backlash that had been going on throughout the 1970s, this conservative revival. So this new talk would be about the new right. And it is very cultural. It is very cultural. Partially because evangelical Protestant Christians started voting overwhelmingly for Republicans. It just wasn't like that before. And Jerry Falwell, and in fact, he would start Liberty University as kind of this conservative bastion, as opposed to this liberalism that was infecting the world. That was a very big, prominent school. But also there was a backlash against civil rights, backlash against women's rights, and abortion rights. The Republican Party was actually for abortion rights, the majority, but by the end of the decade, overwhelmingly opposed. And that was a big backlash, especially because of what that did for women's rights. But also, one of the things about was the old hierarchies. I put a question mark in a line through it for reasons I'm not sure why, but the old hierarchies were gone. And this idea that people were losing their place. There's going to be a lot of talk about going back. In fact, there's a big 1950s revival. Some of the most popular television shows and movies were about the 1950s. In fact, three of the most popular television shows all took place in the 50s. APUSH, Happy Days, and Laverne and Shirley all took place in the 1950s. And so there's this revival. It's no coincidence that when Reagan ran for president, it was, let's make America great again. Let's go back to the way it was in the 1950s. Yes, President Trump stole that. And the gas shortage, that was probably the biggest issue. That gas shortage just led people to feel really vulnerable. I mean, really vulnerable. It was a scary moment. Now, let's be clear about it. Gas prices went up. They produced more to meet the demand, and prices would drop dramatically in the early 80s. I mean, dramatically, prices would drop. But nobody knew that in '79. People were talking about being out of gasoline and and electricity by the early 1980s. And so this was running against government. Running against government. Government was causing these things. If we just get government off of our backs, all those pesky regulations, or things that we don't like demanding equal rights, then it would just happen naturally. But then behind the scenes, they're not to say this because the programs were so popular, but this was anti-New Deal. But don't tell anybody. Desperately want to get rid of the progressive income taxes. Desperately want to break labor unions, which both would happen. Wanted to attack Social Security. Wanted to attack programs like Medicare or school lunch programs or things like that. But I'm not talking about those because people like those programs. We'll see what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And the election of 1980, the Democrats, actually there was a very contested primary, but Carter would come out of it. And Carter moved to be more conservative, especially foreign policy. In fact, he became a Cold Warrior. So all of you young men, you have to write, when you turn 18, you have to register for the draft, right? Why did they pass that law? Because of Afghanistan. That's why it was passed. We're not going to let the commies take us by surprise. Why it's still there, I don't know. It's a zombie law. You can't kill it. So Carter moved to the right, but Carter was really seen as an ineffectual president, and there's good argument for that. I'm not saying it was. He had this aura where he never really was in control. Here's a cartoon, one of the more famous ones, and it's Jimmy Carter at the Oval Office, beating on the desk at the Oval Office, the fortitude desk, and it said, "Who's in charge here?" And it's Carter doing it. And that's by a cartoonist who is actually pro-Democrats. The Republicans, well, the conservative revival that began with Goldwater completely took over the Republican Party. And that slogan, "Make America Great Again," that was to go back when people knew their place. And it was very conservative economically. He promised massive tax cuts and get rid of the pesky regulations that were stifling business. That's what he said. And also states' rights. And states' rights was anti-civil rights. In fact, he announced his campaign for presidency in Philadelphia, Mississippi on purpose, on the anniversary of 3 civil rights workers that were murdered trying to register voters in 1963. So Reagan did not hide his view on civil rights. And if you ever listen to Reagan, you knew when he talked freedom. But it was a very effective campaign because people felt as though the U.S. was in decline, especially when oil prices, gas prices were up and it mattered more. So it kind of shocked everybody. It looked like it'd be a relatively close election, but then it just overwhelmingly, it wasn't so much pro-Reagan, it was anti-Carter. And it turned into very much a Reagan landslide. And yep, that's it for the South. A third-party candidate got in, took some of the votes away from Carter, but still, it was a big Reagan victory. But almost immediately, Reagan's economic program ran into a Democratic House of Representatives. There was talk about the U.S. sending forces to Nicaragua. It looked like we might get involved in another Vietnam. I mean, overnight. And then Reagan started talking casually about nuclear war. And Reagan sincerely believed that not only could the U.S. win a nuclear war, but that nuclear war really wasn't that bad. And I'm not making that up. Reagan really didn't have a firm grasp of nuclear war or history. But then, 2 months into his term, there was an assassination. John Hinckley unloaded a revolver from about 3 paces away. I know he's a salsa. No. Oh, does everyone understand that the presidents won't be until the end of that first week of June?
Yeah, June 6th.
Yeah, June 5th or 6th. So you don't have to worry about it for the same day we did the fund, right? You don't have to worry about
When
the
will we
fund.
get a review list?
Don't read it. No. Gotta know stuff. So,
Oh, no, you put it up already.
well, for part of it, there is something on Teams.
Yeah.
And if you paid attention to Teams, you might know that's a hint for something. Or not. You guys are very intelligent. You figure it out. You guys are really smart. In fact, that's why I told you many times, I would teach in this class. No class will ever match this class.
You're gonna see the same things.
I would never say that to another class, never. Check on Teams, they'll give you a hint. All right. John Hinckley sincerely believed that the actress Jodie Foster would fall in love with him, kill the president. So he shot Ronald Reagan. And they are still married today. And no, he would be in a mental institution for 40 years. But Reagan would nearly die. Bullet went into his abdomen. You can see him right there. They're throwing him into the limousine. He'd been hit. And we didn't know at the time, but he was nearly killed. It was so close. They had to do emergency surgery, and it was nip and tuck. But he came out of it. Right. He came out of it. It's almost like a martyr, like more popularity. And because of this assassination, put this down. It almost like they didn't want to vote against him, and most of his economic program would pass after the assassination. It also probably triggered his dementia that would lead to Alzheimer's. And for his second term, they hid that from the American public. He was clearly suffering horribly from Alzheimer's, but that was kept secret. And he would die from that a couple years after his presidency. Horrible disease that if anybody knows about it personally, you know how awful it is. And me. And so, and that's something they're actually talking about President Biden right now. So it's kind of fascinating once again how things kind of cycle around. And so somebody in this classroom was in 8th grade. And they were in study. And we were in a big room in study on Washington Middle School in Miles City. And we're sitting in study hall. And our teacher, who everyone was afraid of, was Miss Fretlin. I still remember Miss Fretlin. Miss Fretlin, somebody yelled at her, and she ran out. I think it's like a big library auditorium. And she ran out, and she came back in, white as a sheet. And I'll never forget it. She said, "The president has been shot." And then she collapsed on her desk and started to cry. And there's something. And we all assumed president shot me, the president was dead. That's what we thought. And whoever the person was in 8th grade. But that is something. Now, as it turned out, it would be hours later, because how could you find that out in 1981? You had to wait until someone turned on the television news that there was a TV in the library. And that's how you found out. Okay, so Reaganomics. That would be Reagan's economic supply side or trickle down economic program. And this is returned back to the 1920s. In fact, he would say his favorite president was Calvin Coolidge. And it was deregulation. So they got in environmental laws, which have never really recovered from that to this day. Now they're gone. And also like food safety laws, got rid of those, most of them. They just quit enforcing them. But the big one was getting rid of antitrust. They got rid of monopolies. Also, huge cuts to social programs. So massive cuts to, the biggest cuts are going to be programs to aid working people, like food stamps, what we call SNAP today, other direct aid programs, and the other big ones for education. This was a radical cut for education. Now, it wouldn't be until the end of the decade where people would start seeing it, but college tuitions would go up about 250% because of these cuts. I caught the tail end of the low college cuts. Those have been gone ever since. And they started right here. And then they think that cut school lunch programs, which is happening right now. They're going to cut school lunch programs now. It's going to work right now. So once again, we're kind of in a cycle. conservative leadership. You won't say that's good or bad, that's up to you. But one of my favorite parts about cutting of school lunch is they got money for school lunch. It said, one of the most expensive thing are vegetables in school lunch. So when the announcements of the Reagan administration was to ketchup was a vegetable, and therefore we don't need to provide anything else. Ketchup is a vegetable, right? It's got this red. That is a true story. There are other ones too. Okay, so, but the big thing is tax cuts. Massive tax cuts for the very wealthy. Everyone got that? Massive tax cuts. And what they said is, even though we have tax cuts, it will actually cut the budget deficit and will balance the budget. Because Arthur Laffer was this economist. Oh, we're jumping right here. Arthur Laffer. Laffer was an economist. And he actually drew this diagram on a napkin. And he saw his influence. I just literally saw him on TV about a week and a half ago. And he said tax cuts will actually increase tax revenues because it will put more money in the hands of the wealthy who will build factories. So it's basically justifying trickle down. So what he said is, if you raise taxes up to a certain point, people will quit working because they pay too much taxes and tax revenues will drop. Now, you notice there's no real numbers on that except from 0 and 100% because it's never worked. If you cut taxes, deficits go up. And that's what's going to happen in the 80s. And that's what's going to happen in every state that's tried it. That's what happened in the 2000s. And that's going to happen now. So what happened to deficits? Deficits went up to a record level. Interest payments on the bonds actually made their highest point since World War II during the 80s. In fact, the accumulated debt of Ronald Reagan's 8 years was greater than the accumulated debt of the United States from 1776 to 1980. And so the debt went up dramatically. But this is actually the most interesting point. The highest marginal income tax rate under Reagan went from 91 to 70 to 28%. That is the highest marginal income tax rate. This red line is the national debt. Look what happens when you cut those taxes. Now, that was opposite of what they said. Is having a high debt a bad thing? Not necessarily if people think you can pay back your debt. If people don't think you can pay back your debt, that's when your economy crashes. Awesome. And then when you be back? Tuesday?
Oh, yeah, Tuesday.
Okay, good. Looking up, we're not doing hand pumps. You excited? Last thing for today. Last thing. So what was the result? Remember the Great Compression, where the gap between the rich and the poor shrank from the New Deal to 1980? That completely reversed, and now the economic term is the Great Divergence. And so this line, the blue is the distribution of income for the bottom 90%, the red for the top 10%. And look at the reversal. Here's New Deal. You can see it right here, the beginning of trickle down economics. And so did it work? Trickle down economics? Absolutely. If their goal is to funnel money to the wealthy with the idea that they know better what to do with it, it works really well. Now, was it equal? Absolutely not. Half of all spending now is done by the top 10%. But that, if you want to look at our nation and what happened, like college costs and stuff, it starts right here. Once again, good or bad, depends on your economic and your political point of view. And then, by the way, I'll start this tomorrow. I don't know why I didn't add an F there, but I just put cold war heat up. Tomorrow I'll finish this. It's amazing how.
I was gone.
Oh, thank you. Did you like it?
Yeah.
Great. So if everything goes right Friday, we'll watch the 80s. Sound good? You like it? Good. Nailed it, 100% right.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, you know what? If there's one you don't know, just move on. Not a big deal, right? Not a big deal at all.
I was wondering on this one, like, what? If
Okay.
you're wrong on that.
Did
Did I not have something or?
So you got.
Oh, I told you, I was like, we did. Oh,
I just didn't. I was getting him a little 50 points.
okay,
I'll just change it.
okay.
So.
I was like, I swear to God, I did that.
You did.
Yeah.
I just accidentally put this on here.
In timer zones, it best probably 2 hours. That's so bad.
Don't worry, I will change it. Yeah, you did good. Yeah, that's a pretty funny cartoon. It's very anti-Reagan, but I just think it's really funny because it's really good.
Yeah, I think that's how like Americans view America today.
Americans, there is an issue about not knowing the world. And it's causes problems down the road.
What are you talking about? I know everything about America. I know we're the center of the universe.
Now, don't get me wrong, Brits are the same way. Brits don't know anything. Just look at Brexit.